My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 38 years old, and until last spring, I honestly believed my life was one of those solid, dependable ones. Maybe not glamorous, but built with both hands and hard work. I ran a home renovation company in Asheville, North Carolina. 7 employees. Steady contracts. The kind of reputation where people didn't ask if I could fix something, they asked how soon I could show up. I had a 3-bedroom house on the edge of town, a golden retriever named Maya, who thought every stranger was a professor and his wife, Lena, who laughed like she had never been alone. We've been married 12 years. Not perfect, but stable. That's what I kept telling myself whenever I wanted to do a conflict come, or whenever my dad decided to take me to Saturday morning in April, 8:03 a.m., and I was standing on the back deck with coffee in one hand, watching Milo lose his mind chasing squirrels along the fence line. The air had that early spring bite, the kind that makes you feel awake and hopeful for no reason. My phone buzzed against the railing. I glanced down, expecting something boring, one of my guys asking about paint color, a client changing a timeline. Instead, it was Lena. One short message that didn't even bother with a greeting. "Hey, Ethan, about next weekend. Mom thinks it's better if I go alone. She really wants this to just be a girls' trip. Hope you understand." I read it once, then again slower, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Next weekend was supposed to be our mountain cabin retreat, the one we'd booked 6 months ago as a belated anniversary thing with her parents and her sister's family. I'd paid for the cabin. I'd stocked it too. Firewood, groceries, a decent bottle of bourbon for her dad. I'd even built a custom fire pit in the backyard of the place as a surprise, because I'm the kind of idiot who still thinks effort gets noticed if you just do enough of it. I called her immediately. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright and casual, like she was asking me to grab milk on the way home. "Oh, babe?" she said. "Don't be upset. Mom just thought it'd be nice for us girls to reconnect. You know how she gets sentimental." My grip tightened around the phone. "So I'm not family now?" I asked, keeping my voice level because somewhere deep down I still believed calm would earn me fairness. She sighed like I was being difficult. "It's not personal," she said, and those 3 words hit me harder than anything else she could have said. Not personal. Like I was a coworker who didn't make the cut for an invite. Like 12 years together was just a detail. I stood there on the deck while Milo barked at the squirrels and my coffee went cold in my hand, realizing something I didn't want to admit. If it was not personal, then maybe I'd never been personal to them at all. I didn't say much after that. I remember making some non-committal sound like, "Yeah? Okay," because my brain was still trying to catch up to what my ears had just heard. Lena filled the silence the way she always did when something uncomfortable hovered between us. She talked faster, lighter, like she could smooth it over with tone alone. "It's just a weekend," she said. "Mom's been emotional lately. You know how she gets around family stuff." Family stuff. I almost laughed at that, because if this was family stuff, where exactly did that leave me? But I didn't laugh. I didn't yell either. I just asked, "So when were you going to tell me? Like, today? Or the morning we're supposed to leave?" That finally changed her voice a little, a hint of irritation creeping in. "Ethan, don't make this a big thing," she said. "I thought you'd understand." Understand. That word always showed up when she wanted me to swallow something that should have been hard to swallow. And I realized right there that she wasn't asking me to understand her. She was asking me to make it easy for her. We hung up a minute later. She said she had to run an errand, and I didn't even bother asking what kind, because it didn't matter. I stood on the deck until the coffee in my mug smelled like regret, and Milo finally got bored of the squirrel. When I went back inside, the house felt strangely quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at that message again, the one that started it all. It was the casualness that kept twisting the knife. Not an apology, not a conversation, just a quick update, like my presence was a scheduling conflict she'd resolved. And when my mind did that thing it does, when it's trying to protect you, when it drags up memories you kept packed away because they didn't fit the story you wanted to believe. I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when Elaine, Lena's mother, looked right at me while she was carving the turkey and said, "Lena always did love her little fixer-uppers," like she was talking about a broken chair she'd rescued from the curb. I remembered Christmas when Gerald barely nodded at me before spending 20 minutes asking Lena's sister's husband about his promotion, like the guy's job title mattered more than my existence. I remembered the way Elaine would introduce me to her friends as Lena's husband. He does construction, like I'd wandered into the marriage off a job site and never fully cleaned up. I'd always told myself it was fine. I didn't need their approval. I had a business. I paid my bills. I took care of my wife. But sitting there with that text glowing on my screen, it hit me all at once. It wasn't just that her parents didn't respect me. It was that Lena had spent 12 years quietly adapting to their disrespect and calling it normal. And maybe the reason it hurt so much was because a part of me had known the truth for a long time. I'd just been too busy trying to earn a seat at their table to admit they'd never saved a chair for me in the first place. By noon, I couldn't sit still anymore. That's the thing about being the kind of man who fixes things for a living. When something breaks, your hands start reaching for tools before your heart even finishes hurting. I paced the living room, looked out the front window like I expected Lena to pull into the driveway and say, "I'm sorry, that was stupid." But the street stayed empty. So I did what I always do when the ground shifts under me. I went looking for facts. I called Marcus Lee, my attorney, the same guy who'd helped me structure my business contracts and keep my paperwork clean. He answered with his usual calm, like nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. "Ethan," he said, "what's up?" I told him it was hypothetical at first, because saying the truth out loud felt too sharp, but my voice gave me away. "If I paid for a family trip and then got told not to come," I said, "can I cancel it?" There was a pause. Then he asked the kind of questions only a lawyer asks when he's already guessing the ending. Who booked it? Whose card? Whose name on the contract? I told him the truth. I booked the cabin, my card, my email, my name, paid in full months ago. Marcus exhaled slow. "Then yes," he said, "you can cancel, and if you're still inside the refund window, you can get everything back." He didn't say it yet, but I could hear it in the silence, the part where he was waiting to see if I was really about to do something irreversible. I stared at the wall above our fireplace where Lena had hung a framed photo from our honeymoon, the two of us sunburned and smiling like the world was safe. "There's more," I said. "The house, I bought it before we married, 4 years before. It's in my name." Marcus didn't hesitate. "That matters," he said. "It doesn't automatically mean she gets nothing, but it means you have options. What's going on, Ethan?" I should have lied again, should have softened it, but something about the morning had scraped all the softness out of me. "My wife just uninvited me from a trip I paid for," I said, "because her mom wants it to be just family, and she went along with it like I'm a roommate who overstayed his welcome." Another pause, heavier this time. "Okay," Marcus said quietly, "then you need to document everything. Save the text, don't delete anything. And don't make emotional decisions that create legal problems." After I hung up, I sat at my desk and pulled up the cabin reservation. My finger hovered over the cancellation button longer than I expected, not because I was unsure, but because I was realizing what that click would really mean. Canceling the cabin wasn't about money. It was me admitting I wasn't going to keep funding a life where I had to ask permission to belong. I clicked. The confirmation email hit my inbox 30 seconds later. Full refund pending. And in that moment, with one simple transaction, something inside me went quiet, like the part of me that had been begging to be included finally sat down and stopped talking. That afternoon, I moved through the house like I was walking around inside someone else's life, touching things I'd taken for granted. Lena's sweater draped over the chair, the mug with her initials by the sink, the little stack of mail we always said we'd sort later. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just got painfully clear. Lena still hadn't come home, and when I texted, "Are you coming back tonight?" she answered 20 minutes later with, "Staying at Mom's. Easier for planning." Easier. That word again, like I was the complication, not the man she'd promised a life to. I opened the closet in our bedroom and pulled out a duffel bag, then another, and started packing without drama. Work clothes, a few decent shirts, my boots, paperwork, my passport, the folder where I kept contracts and property documents. I grabbed Milo's leash and his food bin and set them by the door. Then I called my foreman, Jake, and told him I needed him to run the cruise for a couple weeks. He started to ask questions, but my voice must have warned him off because all he said was, "You good?" And I answered, "Not really." And he said, "All right, I've got it." Around dusk, Lena finally called, too cheerful, too late, like she sensed something was off, but still believed she could talk her way back into normal. "Ethan, you okay?" she asked. I looked around the kitchen where we'd eaten 1,000 meals, and I realized if I stayed in that room, I'd end up begging for scraps of respect I shouldn't have to beg for. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just tired." She started talking about her mom's plans, her sister's schedule, all the logistics of a trip I no longer existed in, and something in me snapped into calm. Not anger. Calm. When she paused to breathe, I said, "I canceled the cabin." Silence. Then a sharp inhale like she'd been slapped. "What?" she whispered. "I canceled it," I repeated. "You said it was a girls' trip, so I figured you'd want to handle it yourselves." She went from stunned to defensive in 2 seconds. "Ethan, that was ridiculous. We can talk about this." But I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I waited until she ran out of words. Then I said, "I'm going to take Milo and get some space. Don't come back tonight." I hung up before she could pull me back into the old pattern. I wrote a note on a scrap of paper and taped it to the counter where she couldn't miss it. "Since I'm not part of the family trip, I'm taking one of my own. I need time. Don't follow me, E." Then I loaded my truck in the dark. Milo hopped into the passenger seat like he trusted me to know where we were going. And I drove north on the highway with nothing but road noise and my own heartbeat filling the cab, half terrified, half relieved, like a man who'd finally stepped out of a room he didn't realize had been suffocating him for years. I drove until Asheville felt like a story I'd heard about somebody else, the miles stacking up behind me like a wall I couldn't climb back over, even if I wanted to. By the time the sun dropped, the highway had narrowed into 2 lanes and the mountains swallowed the last of the light, that deep blue dusk that makes everything look quiet and honest. Milo slept with his head against the door, and I kept going because stopping meant thinking, and thinking felt like picking at a bruise. Around midnight, I rolled into a little West Virginia town called Maple Hollow. One main road, a diner with a flickering open sign, a gas station that smelled like coffee and motor oil, and a motel that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. I paid cash for a room, let Milo out to sniff the gravel parking lot, and sat on the bed fully dressed staring at the ceiling fan as it rattled through the night. The next morning, I ate eggs at the diner and watched the locals talk to each other like they'd known one another their whole lives. Nobody looked at me twice. For the first time in years, I wasn't being measured by anyone's expectations. After breakfast, I walked past a row of tired buildings and saw a hand-painted sign in a window. "Shop for rent." It was an old mechanic's place, 2 bay doors, concrete floors, a little office that smelled like dust and grease. The owner, a man named Harlan, met me there with keys and a cigarette tucked behind one ear. I told him I needed a month, maybe 2. He asked no questions, just named a price and nodded when I handed him cash like I'd done it 100 times. That afternoon, I swept the floors, aired the place out, set my tools on a workbench, and felt something in my chest loosen. Not happiness exactly, just space. The calls started before I even finished unpacking. Lena's name lit up my phone like a warning flare. I watched it ring out, then buzz again, then again. When I finally checked my messages, they came in waves, confusion first, then anger. "Ethan, what is going on? Did you seriously cancel the cabin? My mom is freaking out. Call me back right now." I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just didn't trust my own voice not to crack open and spill everything I'd held down for 12 years. Instead, I walked into town, bought lumber from the hardware store, and fixed a sagging porch step for a woman who paid me in a $50 bill and a slice of homemade pie. The work was simple. Honest. You fix what's broken, you get paid, you go home. No politics, no silent judgments. That night, I sat on the motel steps with Milo's leash wrapped around my wrist and scrolled through Lena's newest text. "We had to cover everything ourselves. This is embarrassing. Come home." And that was the moment the truth finally settled in, heavy and clear. She didn't miss me. She missed the stability I provided, the things she assumed would always be there, no matter how small they made me feel. I put the phone face down, stared out at the quiet street, and realized Maple Hollow wasn't just a place I'd stopped. It was the first place in a long time where I could hear my own thoughts without someone else's family standing between me and my dignity. A week into Maple Hollow, the town had started to recognize my truck the way small places do, like you're either passing through or you're becoming part of the scenery, and I was somewhere in between when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it out of habit, but something told me it was the kind of call that would keep circling until it hit me anyway, so I answered. "Hello?" I said, and the voice on the other end didn't waste time warming up. "Ethan?" Elaine snapped like my name tasted bad in her mouth. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, but you're embarrassing Lena. You're embarrassing this whole family." There it was. Not concern, not confusion. Image management. I leaned back against the motel headboard and stared at the water stain on the ceiling like it might translate her nonsense into something reasonable. "Embarrassing?" I repeated. "You told my wife to leave me out of a trip I paid for." She laughed once, sharp, dismissive. "Oh, don't be dramatic. We wanted girl time. Mothers and daughters, sisters. You men always make everything about yourselves." My jaw tightened, not because she was wrong about men, but because she was proving the exact point I'd spent 12 years trying to deny. "Then you should have paid for girl time," I said evenly. "You don't get to take my money and my respect and still treat me like I'm optional." Her voice went colder. "Lena married beneath her," she said, like it was a simple fact she'd been patiently waiting to share. I warned her. "A man who throws tantrums and runs away?" "I didn't run away," I cut in. "I stepped out of a role you people assigned me. The role where I fund the plans and smile while you remind me I don't belong." She inhaled like she was gearing up to hit me harder, but I wasn't giving her the stage anymore. "Tell Lena I'm safe," I said. "Tell her I'm not coming back just because you're uncomfortable with consequences." "Consequences?" Elaine hissed. "You're punishing her." "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "I'm refusing to keep shrinking." Then I ended the call before she could twist my words into another weapon. The next day, Gerald called, Lena's dad, and his tone was softer, almost reasonable, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Ethan," he said, "you've made your point, but 12 years is a long time to throw away over a misunderstanding." I stared at the tool bench in the rented shop, the neat row of wrenches I'd lined up like order could fix what chaos had done. "It's not a misunderstanding," I told him. "A misunderstanding is when someone forgets to add your name to a reservation. This was a decision, and Lena agreed to it." Gerald sighed like a man trying to keep a boat steady while someone drills holes in it. "Elaine can be intense," he said. "You know that." "Yeah," I said. "And I also know your family has spent 12 years asking me to be the bigger person, which really means be the quieter one." He went silent for a beat, then asked, "What would it take for you to come home?" I didn't hesitate. "It would take my wife choosing me without needing permission." Another silence, heavier. He didn't argue after that. He just said, "I'll tell her," and hung up. When the line went dead, I realized something with a strange kind of relief. For the first time, they weren't speaking to me like family. They were speaking to me like a resource that had stopped cooperating. And that meant I'd done the right thing by leaving before they convinced me to call it love. 2 nights after Gerald's call, Lena finally stopped coming at me through anger and started coming at me through something softer. It was late, after 10, when my phone rang again. Her name flashed across the screen, and for a second my hand didn't move, like my body was waiting to see if my pride would betray me. I answered anyway. "Ethan," she said, and her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, like she'd been holding her breath for days. There was no brightness in it this time, no babe, no casual tone that tried to smooth everything flat, just her raw. "Please don't hang up." I didn't say anything because if I opened my mouth too fast, I knew I'd either yell or forgive her on reflex, and I didn't trust either of those instincts anymore. She took my silence as permission. "I didn't think it would go like this," she whispered. She's been on me, and I just..." I didn't want to fight. The words landed exactly where I expected them to, like a dart I'd seen thrown 100 times. I leaned back against the wall of the little office in the rented shop, staring at the dusty window that looked out onto the empty street. So you threw me out of the trip, I said slowly, to avoid fighting with your mom. Lena inhaled sharply. It wasn't like that. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd be upset, but I didn't think you'd disappear. Her voice cracked on that last word, and I felt it. Felt the old part of me that wanted to rush in and fix it, to make her feel safe again. But that part of me had been doing all the fixing for 12 years, and it hadn't bought me a single ounce of respect. Lena, I said, quieter than I expected, why didn't you tell her no? She started crying then, the kind of crying where someone is trying to stay composed but keeps failing. Because she's my mom, she choked out, like that was the end of the argument. Because she doesn't listen. Because she makes everything miserable when she doesn't get her way. I swallowed hard. And you'd rather I be miserable than her? No, she pleaded. That's not what I meant. I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, but because I needed her to sit inside the truth without me rescuing her from it. Name one time, I said finally, in our whole marriage, when you chose me over her. One time when she said something about me and you told her to stop. One time when she tried to control something and you drew a line. On the other end of the call, the crying slowed into quiet, uneven breathing. Seconds passed, then more. When she spoke again, her voice was barely there. I can't. The words didn't hit like a surprise. They hit like confirmation, like the last piece clicking into place. That's why I'm not coming back, I said. Not because of the cabin, because I can't spend my life begging my own wife to treat me like I matter. She tried to protest, tried to promise she'd change, tried to say she could talk to her mom, but it sounded like panic more than conviction. I listened until she ran out of breath. Then I said the only honest thing left. I love you, I told her, and my throat tightened on it. But love doesn't work when I'm always the one being sacrificed to keep the peace. I ended the call gently, set the phone down, and sat there in the quiet feeling the strangest mix of grief and relief, like I'd finally stopped arguing with reality. The day after that call, I woke up before sunrise, like my body still expected to hear Lena moving around the kitchen, still expected the rhythm of the life I just cut loose. Instead, there was only the low hum of the motel heater and Milo's steady breathing at the foot of the bed. I took him outside while the town was still quiet, the sky pale and washed out like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be yet, and I realized something simple. Nobody here knew me as Lena's husband. Nobody here had a story about what I deserved. I was just a guy with a truck, a dog, and hands that knew how to build. I started spending my mornings at the rented shop and my afternoons doing small jobs around Maple Hollow. Porch repairs, leaky faucets, busted cabinet doors, things that had been annoying people for months because nobody had time to fix them. The work didn't feel like escape anymore. It felt like grounding. Every screw I drove in, every board I leveled, it was like I was rebuilding something inside myself that had been tilted for a long time. A couple weeks in, Harlan mentioned a piece of land on the edge of town, 5 acres that had been sitting untouched since some old-timer passed. The kind of property with an overgrown fence line and a half-collapsed barn that looked like it had finally gotten tired of holding itself up. I drove out to see it on a cloudy afternoon, Milo bouncing in the passenger seat, and the second I stepped onto that land, I felt a strange, quiet yes in my chest. It wasn't gorgeous in a postcard way, but it was honest. A view of the valley, trees thick enough to block out the road, and space, real space, where nobody could corner me into being small. I bought it without a speech, without fanfare, just signatures and a cashier's check from an account Lena had never cared to ask about, because she'd always assumed I'd handle money the way I handled everything else. Silently, reliably. I spent the next month reinforcing the barn, replacing rotten beams, and turning it into a workshop that felt like mine in a way the house in Asheville never quite had. I filed the paperwork for a one-man outfit, nothing fancy, just Brooks Homecraft. And for the first time in years, my life didn't feel like it belonged to other people's expectations. That's how I ended up at the public library one rainy Tuesday. Not for books. though I told myself I was there to print invoices, but because the library had warmth and quiet and the kind of peace you don't realize you miss until you're inside it again. A woman behind the desk looked up when I walked in, mid-30s, dark hair twisted up, reading glasses perched like she actually used them. "If you're here for the printer," she said, "it's temperamental. It needs encouragement." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "I work with power tools," I told her. "I can handle temperamental." She smiled like that was the first real smile she'd had all day. "Good," she said, "because my kitchen sink is leaking like it's trying to escape, and everyone in town told me to call the new guy with the truck." That was Claire Jensen, the librarian with a stubborn sink and a cat that treated my toolbox like an enemy. I followed her home after closing, tightened a fitting that had been loose for months, and listened while she talked the way people do when they're used to being on their own. Direct, unpolished, no performance. When I finished, she didn't look at me like I'd done something I should have done anyway. She looked at me like she was genuinely glad I existed. "Pie?" she asked, nodding toward her kitchen like it was the most normal thing in the world to offer a stranger comfort. And standing there with rain tapping the windows and Milo sniffing around her living room like he'd already decided we belonged, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not romance, just the quiet sense of being welcome without having to earn it. By the time the leaves turned again and Maple Hollow started smelling like wood smoke and damp earth, I'd stopped counting how many days it had been since I left Asheville. The town had settled into me like a jacket that actually fit. My workshop barn wasn't pretty, but it was solid, and there's something addictive about living inside a life you built on purpose. Work came steady. Small kitchens, porch railings, busted water heaters, the kind of problems people were grateful to hand off. I kept it simple: one truck, one dog, one set of keys. And somewhere in the middle of all that quiet rebuilding, Claire became part of my weekly rhythm without either of us announcing it. It started with pie after that first sink repair, then turned into dinners where we didn't try too hard to impress each other. Just two people talking like adults who'd both learned what it costs to ignore red flags. She didn't pry about Lena. She didn't act like she was competing with a ghost. She just listened when I spoke and left silence alone when I didn't. That kind of respect feels almost suspicious when you're not used to it. A year after I left, on a cold Thursday afternoon, I was sanding a cabinet door in the shop when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the area code tugged at me, so I answered. "Ethan Brooks?" a woman asked. Her voice was careful, like she expected me to hang up. "Yeah," I said, wiping sawdust off my hand onto my jeans. "Who's this?" She hesitated, then said, "It's Margaret, Lena's aunt." I hadn't heard that name in years. Margaret lived out of state, only showed up at big holidays, the kind of relative who watched family dynamics like she was observing weather. Quiet, distant, but not blind. "Okay," I said slowly. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you," she replied. I heard what's been going around, and it didn't sit right with me." I leaned back against the workbench, my eyes drifting to Milo asleep near the door. "What's been going around?" I asked, even though I already knew. Margaret exhaled. "Elaine's telling people you ran off, that you panicked, that you abandoned Lena and left her humiliated." She paused. "That's not what happened, not really." I didn't feel the anger I expected to feel. If anything, I felt tired. Tired in that clean way you get when someone confirms you weren't imagining the thing that broke you. "No," I said. "That's not what happened." Margaret's voice softened. "I told her she drove you out. I told her you were treated like you didn't matter, and eventually you believed them. And honestly, Ethan, I don't blame you. Not after what I saw over the years." I swallowed, surprised by the tightness in my throat. "Why are you calling me to say this?" I asked. "Because I don't like lies," she said plainly. "And because Lena's sitting in the wreckage acting like she doesn't know how the fire started." I stared at the dusty sunlight coming through the barn boards and realized something. I didn't need them to admit the truth anymore. I already had my proof, my peace, my work, my quiet mornings, the way Claire looked at me like I belonged without debate. "Thanks," I said, and I meant it. After we hung up, I stood there for a long minute, Not plotting, not spiraling, just breathing. Because the truth was, leaving hadn't ruined my life. It had finally made it mine. 2 years after I left Asheville, I woke up in a house that didn't feel haunted by anyone else's expectations. It was small, one story, wide porch, workshop barn out back, and it sat on my 5 acres like it had always belonged there. Milo was older now, slower to jump, but still the first one to greet me like I was the best decision he'd ever made. Claire was in the kitchen in one of my hoodies, hair pinned up the way she did when she was thinking, humming off key, while she flipped pancakes like she'd been doing it her whole life. That was the kind of peace I didn't know I was allowed to have. Quiet mornings, simple rituals, a partner who didn't treat my presence like an inconvenience that needed to be justified. We didn't rush anything. We didn't make big speeches about forever to prove we were serious. We just kept choosing each other in the small ways that actually matter. Showing up, speaking up, making room. And when I finally asked her to marry me, it wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening on the porch, with the valley turning gold in the last light, Milo's head on her foot, and Claire laughing at something I said because she genuinely found me funny, not because she wanted to smooth over tension. "Yeah," she said like it was the most natural answer in the world. "Of course." We got married that fall under the big oak behind the workshop barn, the one that throws shade like it was built for gatherings. 10 people came. Neighbors, friends, a couple of clients who turned into family in the only way that counts. No forced smiles, no polite cruelty dressed up as tradition, nobody whispering about whether I was good enough to be there. Claire's cat even showed up, circling the chairs like it was supervising. And when we said our vows, I realized how different it felt to promise your life to someone who had already proven, in 100 ordinary moments, that they'd protect the us without needing a committee's approval. Later that night, after the last guest left and the string lights were still glowing, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I didn't have to guess who it was. "I heard you got married," it read. "I hope you're happy. I'm sorry for everything." I stared at it for a long time, not because I wanted to reply, but because it felt like the final echo of a life I'd already walked out of. I didn't hate Lena. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt finished. So I set the phone down, went back outside, and found Claire wrapped in a blanket on the porch swing, looking out at the dark hills like she belonged to them. She reached for my hand without asking, and I understood something with a clarity that almost made me laugh. Family isn't a title you earn by tolerating disrespect. It's a choice people make, out loud in public, when it's inconvenient. And if someone can't choose you when it counts, then the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop waiting for them to become the person you needed all along. About 6 months after the wedding, Marcus called me while I was unloading drywall at a job site on the east side of town. I almost didn't answer because my hands were full and my life was finally quiet. But something in his tone, measured, careful, made me tuck the phone between my shoulder and ear. "Ethan," he said, "I'm not calling to stir anything up. I just think you should hear it from me, and not from some random number." I leaned against the truck bed, feeling the cold metal through my shirt. "Hear what?" I asked. Marcus paused like he was choosing words that wouldn't reopen old wounds. "Lena reached out," he said. "Not to me exactly. She emailed my office because she didn't have another way to contact you without it being messy. She said she wants to talk, just once. A real apology. She says she understands now." I stared out at the street where a couple kids rode bikes in circles, laughing like nothing in the world could hurt them. For a second, I felt that old reflex, the part of me trained to fix things, to be reasonable, to offer closure because it makes other people comfortable. Then I looked back at my truck, at the work lined up for the day, at the life I'd built with my own hands, and I realized something. I didn't owe my peace as a payment for her guilt. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. I could hear it in his voice. He wasn't pushing me either way. He was just giving me the option. I took a slow breath and felt the answer settle in like a stone at the bottom of a lake, steady and unmoving. "Tell her I'm glad she's reflecting," I said. "Tell her I hope she finds her own peace, but I'm not meeting." Marcus was quiet for a beat, then said, "Okay, I'll relay that." I thought that would be the end of it, but after I hung up, I stood there longer than I needed to, watching my breath fog in the air, remembering how many times I'd begged, silently, politely, for Lena to choose me when it mattered. That's what people miss when they hear the headline version of the story. They think the leaving is the big moment. It's not. The big moment is the years before, the thousand small times you swallow your own dignity to keep the peace, until one day your body refuses to do it again. That night, Claire found me in the workshop sanding a piece of oak I didn't actually need to sand anymore, just keeping my hands busy. She didn't interrogate me. She just leaned into my side and said, "Old life knocking?" I nodded once. She kissed my shoulder, quiet, grounding, and went back inside like she trusted me to handle it without falling apart. And standing there in that barn, hearing the soft sounds of our home in the distance, I understood why I couldn't meet Lena. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because the chapter had already ended the only way it could end, with me finally choosing myself, the way I'd needed someone else to choose me for years. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. Sometimes it's the life you build afterward, the one that proves you were never too much. You were just in the wrong place, asking the wrong people to see your value. If someone repeatedly makes you feel optional, believe the pattern, not the excuses. Love without loyalty becomes a slow leak that drains your confidence one compromise at a time. Speak up early, set clear boundaries, and watch what happens when respect costs them something. Don't bankroll relationships that won't defend you, and don't confuse peacekeeping with partnership. Document, plan, and protect yourself, emotionally and practically, so you can leave cleanly if you must. Starting over is scary, but staying small is worse. Build your own table and invite people who choose you. Your future self will thank you for the courage today.